Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at the New Balance 880 V14. We're also going to compare it to the New Balance 1080 V13 because they share some similarities. Let's talk about it. Before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. Now today we're taking a look at the New Balance 880 V14, which has been completely redesigned this year. I believe the last 2 years were fairly similar, so New Balance went back to the drawing board, and we have new midsole and upper. Now I will say this is New Balance's moderately cushioned neutral daily trainer, great for runners, walkers, or for people who are on their feet all day long. That's kind of one of their do-it-all workhorse shoes. Now the reason I have the 1080 here is because the 1080 is the larger version of the 880. So if you like the 880 but need a little bit more cushioning, that's where the 1080 V13 comes in. And for someone who likes the 880 V14 but needs a little bit of stability and guidance, you can go to the 860. Which is their stability shoe, or if you kind of like the 1080 but need a little bit of guidance, you can go to the Vongo, which is basically the stability version of the 1080. So I hope that makes sense. That kind of explains some of New Balance's running shoes, because I realize the names can be a little bit confusing. The 880 is the cheaper shoe. It's kind of at the standard price point of $140, while the 1080s can be a little bit more premium at $165. And like I mentioned before, the 1080 is the thicker shoe. It has 33 in the heel, 27 in the forefoot, for a 6mm drop, while the 880 has 29 in the heel and 21 in the forefoot for an 8mm drop. So a little bit more to the 1080 with a slightly lower drop compared to this redesigned 880. The shoes weigh about the same. The 880 is 9.5 ounces, while surprisingly the 1080 is lighter at 9.2. The 880 has an engineered mesh upper with average breathability. The fit is true size, although I do think it is a smidge narrow. The good news is this comes in almost every width and size available, so no matter the size and shape of your foot, there should be an option for you, depending on the colorway that you want. The tongue is lightly padded, it is gusseted, and you have a moderate amount of padding in the ankle and Achilles section with a moderately stiff heel counter. I thought the lockdown was solid. You feel very much attached to this shoe, no heel slip whatsoever. The only minor complaint I had with the upper is when you bend your toe, the lacing system or the base of it kind of jams into the top of your foot. Not a huge issue for me, kind of fades away once you get used to the shoe, but it is kind of minor inconvenience, if you will. Now, if we compare that to the 1080, the 1080 has a knit upper, slightly less breathability, and in my opinion, has a much more narrow fit compared to the 880, especially in the toe box. Has a much more pointed toe box, and I do prefer to have a little bit more volume up there. If we move to the back of the shoe, you have a little bit more padding in the ankle and Achilles section compared to the 880 with a moderately stiff heel counter. The tongue is about the same and is gusseted as well. So the big difference really between the two is the fact that you have a little bit more padding in the back of the shoe and has a slightly more narrow fit with a pointed toe box on the 1080. Moving on to the midsoles, both, at least on paper, have Fresh Foam X. However, after trying both of these models, I will say, at least in my opinion, I feel like these are two completely different formulations of Fresh Foam X, and I'm fairly confident because the 1080 has 4 more millimeters of stack height, yet weighs less, and I think that's because this formulation version of Fresh Foam X is a less dense version. It's a little bit springier, has more energy return to it, and is noticeably softer compared to whatever version they have in the 880. Now, with that being said, this version of the 880, which has been completely redesigned this year, feels softer compared to the previous two versions, especially in the forefoot, as it no longer has fuel cell. So you do have a noticeably softer experience in this updated edition, but it's not as bouncy or as expressive, if you will, compared to the 1080. And even though the midsoles feel completely different, the outsoles look almost identical. New Balance kind of shifted to this vertical flex groove design, if you will. So essentially, the flex grooves are no longer horizontal. They now go up and down the length of the shoe, which stiffens up the forefoot a bit, helps you kind of notice that rocker geometry. I do think it does a decent job. The 880 is fairly flexible and bendable. It's not the stiffest neutral daily trainer I've ever used, and is more flexible compared to the 1080, as the 1080 just has more foam to it and is slightly more rigid. Now, I do appreciate the fact they left a decent amount of rubber on this shoe, mainly because this is a shoe that people typically buy and use for a long period of time. So I do expect this to hold up quite well. And I actually kind of do prefer this vertical rubber orientation, as it does stiffen up the forefoot just a bit more compared to a more traditional setup. After trying both shoes, I do prefer the 1080 as it's lighter, just has a more energetic and fun experience with that special version of Fresh Foam X. Now, I do actually prefer the upper on the 880 just because you have a little bit more volume to the toe box compared to the tapered design we have on the 1080, and the engineered mesh is slightly more breathable compared to the knit material we have here. I'll also say I think this 880 gets a great upgrade. It becomes significantly lighter and softer with that very consistent Fresh Foam X. And while this is not the most exciting neutral daily trainer out there, I think it works. It's great for walkers or for people who just need a solid go-to shoe. I think that's where this kind of fits in. It's not the most exciting, exhilarating, or bouncy neutral daily trainer around, but I think it's kind of a classic, just workhorse standard model for New Balance. And the fact that you do have a slightly softer ride to it, I think brings a nice kind of fresh refresh, pun intended, I guess, to the 880. Well, that concludes my review. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of these two shoes and which one would you go with? I would love to hear from you. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.